breaches, how is anybody supposed to have confidence in her, given the serious responsibilities of the Home Secretary to stand up for our national security, for security standards and for public safety? The Prime Minister promised that this would be a government of integrity, of professionalism and of accountability. Isn't the Home Secretary letting everyone down and failing on all of these counts?
Immigration has gotten way out of control, and turns out Suella Braverman might be to blame for it. The whole thing slowly turned into a crisis and led to her eventually being booted out of the party by Rishi Sunak. Now, even Starmer is taking shots at her with stats and facts. She might be a bad politician, but she's an even worse debater to be destroyed by Starmer and his supporters with such ease. Her blunders aren't just some stupid mistakes, she took deliberate actions with some very real consequences. In a recent conference, Starmer laid the facts out without sugarcoating anything.
From these figures, it is really stark, and I think should shock all of us, because the net migration figures in 2019 were 184,000. And then on the figures we've now got today, 4 years later, literally 4 years later, 906,000. 4 times as many. This isn't immigration that's gone up by a few thousand. This is a policy under the last government that's driven immigration up to record levels, a complete loss of control.
The immigration crisis is growing at a rate that's frankly unbelievable. How bad did Suella Braverman mess up the system that it's come to this? According to the data, the influx of migrants is off the charts, and it's unlike anything Starmer could have ever expected. He blames Suella and the previous government for completely giving up control of the borders, and he's not the only one to do so. In fact, when Suella still had a job, Yvette Cooper absolutely demolished her in Parliament.
I'm really intrigued as to what Keir Starmer is going to come up with. I mean, he clearly senses, unusually, he's got his finger on the pulse in sensing that the nation is absolutely mutinous over these latest immigration figures, because they truly are astonishing. I think there was a general expectation at Westminster that figures would be quite significantly lower than what was published today.
Starmer is no saint, but even the people who hate him are seeing his points. They can understand that the crisis is spiraling out of control, and it all traces back to how Suella failed to do anything about it. Maybe that is why Starmer called a sudden conference to come clean to the British public. The people are at the edge, waiting to lash out in anger over the state of this country. Naturally, Starmer got scared, but is he just using the previous government as an excuse, or is there some truth in his words?
But we've also got the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, admitting that they got their figures wrong to the tune of over 200,000, which begs the question of how are we supposed to trust any of these figures that are coming out? So I don't know what Keir Starmer can possibly come out with now that is going to make many people feel a lot better. Since you can't reverse all this huge influx, these people are mostly here to stay.
It would be foolish to deny that the current government isn't incompetent. Really, Starmer has failed time and time again, but in this specific case, he's right about the previous government, and Suella Braverman is at the center of it all. She made the situation much worse, and now we're left with uncertainty, and even the data isn't trustworthy. The agencies are constantly flip-flopping like Starmer, and they can't seem to provide an accurate figure for the immigrant inflow. Nobody really knows how many immigrants have been coming in at this point, and there's nothing Starmer can do about it.
Well, what they need is an actual system for assessing who's in and who's out of the country, and we just don't have an accurate way, it seems, of recording that. Now, I don't know why this is so difficult. You know, we're a pretty modern country with modern passport systems for coming in and out and so on. I mean, other countries don't seem to have such a problem calculating who's in and who's out. They take records when people leave the country. But the truth is that, as these statistics show, since they're, casually tell us that they somehow were mistaken to the tune of 200,000+ people.
It is baffling that a country as advanced and modern as the United Kingdom is struggling to keep track of the immigrants. We seem to have no clue about how many of these immigrants are already within our borders. The agencies that we are supposed to trust just admitted that they got their numbers wrong by a margin of 200,000. That's more inaccurate than everything Starmer has done so far. But how does Suella Braverman really fit into the picture?
that even the figures that we're being given now are a gross underestimate. And, you know, for anybody to headline on the fact that net migration is falling, I think is gaslighting the British people to a truly deplorable extent, because we all feel it. Look at the state of the country. You can feel that everything is under an awful lot of pressure. The actual crowding in urban areas.
Starmer falls back to his typical routine of gaslighting and lying to the British public. He tried to argue that the net migration rates are falling, but that's simply not true. The accuracy of the data is dubious. The figures are grossly underestimated, and Starmer's government is just as much to blame for this mess as Suella Braverman. Just how bad are the numbers really looking?
Essentially, people who are here to live, outweighing the amount of people that leave the country. 906,000 2023. To June 2024, another 728,000. And these are the conservative figures. So we've already got 1.7 million out of that. Next year, apparently, the figures will look pretty much the same.
Even for a conservative estimate, that's a damning statistic. The number of immigrants is doubling every year, and we have millions of new additions into the population to take care of. Most of the welfare and benefits they end up claiming will be paid for by your taxpayer money. Is that something we should be okay with? Starmer's explanation is not acceptable. Sure, Suella Braverman made an absolute joke out of the immigration system, but Starmer's no better. At least Starmer has the decency to admit his faults. What Suella did was just simply disgraceful. Meanwhile, people who oppose Brexit are laughing at the rest of us.
See, you know, you idiots that backed Brexit, you know, all that's happened is you're bringing in people from far-flung places in the world that have no cultural affinity with the UK, etc., etc. And to some extent, you know what, they'd be right, because Brexit was never intended to mean that we didn't have the brightest and best, either from all over the world, but including from the EU. And we absolutely opened the floodgates to everybody outside the EU. I mean, what a complete and utter joke.
You can tell how frustrated people are for them to be venting their frustration like this. Even the Brexit opposers are proven right. We got out of the European Union and started importing workers from all around the world at the expense of our culture and cohesion. Now we're paying the price for what Priti Patel started, Suella sped up, and Starmer is continuing. All while the blame game continues from both parties. Suella's term before being eventually fired was an absolute train wreck, and it shows. She got absolutely destroyed by Yvette Cooper in the Parliament.
This is a global migration crisis. We have seen an unprecedented number of attempts to illegally cross the channel in small boats. Some 40,000 people have crossed this year alone, more than double the number of arrivals by the same point last year. Not only is it unnecessary, because many have come from another safe country, it is lethally dangerous. We must stop it.
She stood there announcing her failure to bring the immigration numbers down while the Labour Party laughed at her incompetence. However, the offensive and frankly insane rhetoric that Suella used at that time was concerning. She went as far as to call it an invasion, and needless to say, she was humiliated for those comments on live TV. That's all without mentioning the horrible living conditions she was keeping the immigrants in and the countless laws she broke. It's as if she despised those people.
Turning to the dreadful conditions at Manston, 4,000 people are now on a site designed to accommodate 1,600 people, with some families there for weeks. Conditions that have been described as inhumane, with risks of fire, disorder and infection. There are confirmed diphtheria outbreaks, reports of scabies and MRSA outbreaks. Also reports of outbreaks of violence and untrained staff. She said nothing about what she was doing.
It was a truly dreadful environment for those people with outbreaks of diseases and at times violence as well. You might not like immigration and how it's growing at an unstable rate, but compassion is what Britain has always stood for. In what world is it justified to treat those human beings like that? Just imagine the things Suella would have done if Rishi Sunak didn't toss her out. Oh, but it gets worse. Yvette completely exposes Suella Braverman and completely shreds her credibility.
Behind these are deeper failures in the government's policies on asylum and channel crossings. Decision-making has collapsed. The Home Office took just 14,000 initial asylum decisions in the last 12 months, compared to 28,000 6 years ago. 96% of the small boat arrivals last year have still not had a decision, and initial decisions alone are taking more than 400 days on this Conservative government's watch.
Under Suella Braverman's watch, next to no claims were being processed and the whole asylum system was in a pathetic state. Is this not a governmental failure? Well, Sunak certainly thought so, and what he did to Suella afterwards was perhaps justified. This isn't even the worst of what Suella Braverman had done during the time, and Yvette keeps grilling her over everything.
Added further bureaucracy and delays, leading to tens of thousands more people waiting in asylum accommodation and more than £100 million extra on asylum accommodation bills because their policies are pushing up the use of hotels and the increase in delays.
The policies that Suella Braverman came up with ended up making the situation worse. Instead of speedy processing of asylum claims, her bureaucratic nonsense just kept delaying the situation further. Why did we ever trust such incompetence? It is becoming clear why the Conservatives lost the election so miserably. Then again, the alternative isn't much better either. 100 million extra money from our pockets went towards accommodating the immigrants in hotels, and it was still not enough. Millions and millions more were spent without any clear goal in mind.
Why has the Home Secretary refused our calls for a major new National Crime Agency unit with hundreds of additional specialist officers to work with Europol and others to crack down on the gangs, as well as the urgent work needed with France to get a proper agreement in place?
Suella earlier tried to brag about working with France to crack down on the smuggling gangs. Isn't that ironic how the Conservatives now bash Starmer for trying to do the same? Even at that time, Yvette called Suella out for not agreeing to work with Labour's initiative. Wasn't it the same as what she wanted anyway? The reason as to why Suella didn't work with Labour could either be pettiness or that she had no idea what to really do and was just winging it.
Rwanda plan that she has spent an extra £20 million on top of the £120 million already spent on a policy that she has herself described as failing and that her officials have described as unenforceable and with a high risk of fraud. And isn't it now time to drop this unethical and unworkable scheme and put the money into tackling the backlogs and tackling the criminal gangs instead?
The Rwanda scheme that Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak tried to peddle as some sort of magical deterrent turned out to be a huge waste of our money. We're talking 20 million more pounds of our taxes thrown at a scheme that was never put into action. Granted, Starmer is to blame for scrapping the scheme, but Suella was already being blasted from all sides over the validity of the scheme. So what did Suella do about the overcrowding in these migrant camps?
Can she confirm that she turned down plans, contingency plans that she was offered that would have reduced overcrowding, as the reports say? There are also legal obligations, including under the 1999 Act and the 2018 regulations. Can she confirm she was advised repeatedly that she was breaking the law by failing to agree to these plans?
She went ahead and broke the law and then later complained about being fired. What did she expect? You break the ministerial code, you get punished for it. This isn't rocket science, but Suella can't even understand the basics of government. Many of her advisors told her to get alternative accommodation for the immigrants, even if it was just temporary, but she simply refused. That's a direct violation of her duties, and is it any wonder why she was booted out after this? There's no party on this planet that'd keep such a mess.
So can she confirm, or can she tell us whether in fact she breached the ministerial code which provides for ministers abiding by the law? Did she breach the ministerial code 3 times in a single day? And how is anyone supposed to have confidence in her as a Home Secretary with these serious issues?
Suella Braverman might be the biggest reason that the Conservatives lost the election. Starmer should be thanking her for making the Conservative Party look like a complete incompetent joke. People simply didn't want to trust such a party, and despite Sunak's multiple attempts at damage control, it was simply too late for them.
And given that it's been less than a week since she was reappointed and less than a fortnight since she was first forced to resign for breaching the Ministerial Code, and every day since her reappointment there have been more stories about possible security or Ministerial Code breaches, how is anybody supposed to have confidence in her, given the serious responsibilities of the Home Secretary to stand up for our national security, for security standards and for public safety?
Suella had already been forced to resign once before over security concerns. That's right, the Home Secretary was tattling sensitive information and leaking documents. After being reappointed, she didn't learn from her mistakes and was immediately back on her nonsense. Her plan to stop immigration was so bad that she was getting owned on morning news channels, and here we thought Starmer was a bad debater.
The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has warned millions, if not billions, that's the word she uses in an article in the Daily Mail today, billions of asylum seekers could come to the UK without her planned immigration crackdown.
She's defended the government's controversial new plan to stop asylum seekers from crossing the Channel. Despite warnings, the new legislation is likely to be in breach of human rights laws.
Even the United Nations was calling her out on her irresponsible and hasty actions. Of course, there's a proper way to do these things, and Suella should have tackled immigration in a way that didn't breach international law. Instead, what she did was something you would expect from a toddler.
45,000 in boat crossings in the past year. You say there are 100 million people displaced around the world and likely billions more eager to come here if possible. On what planet is that likely? And how is that not inflammatory language?
Was this her attempt at fear-mongering? By greatly exaggerating the numbers to millions and billions, she was trying to scare everyone into supporting whatever she wanted. Of course, it's pretty pathetic when you get destroyed over it first thing in the morning. You can tell that she did not expect to be called out for her nonsense like this.
This is an unsustainable level of a problem that we've got, and it's now necessary for us to take steps to stop it.
There are 100 million displaced people worldwide. That is true. Only a quarter of them have left their own country. So even the 100 million figure doesn't hold up, let alone the billions that you have flagged in the Daily Mail this morning.
I think we can look at, we can argue about the numbers of the millions of people around the world who would like to come in the United Kingdom.
It's not an argument. Only 26 million have even left their own country.
Using facts to manipulate the narrative is just shameful for a Home Secretary to do. She tried to pressure the courts into passing her Rwanda scheme only to have it scrapped. This level of incompetence got her fired, and then she went ahead and threw a massive tantrum that nobody cared about, not even Rishi Sunak.
We are confident that our measures are lawful, but we have made clear that we are testing legal arguments. We're running novel legal arguments.
But it's been widely reported this morning that the government's own panel of lawyers are advising you that there's a bigger than 50% chance that this won't get through the courts, that you will actually lose the legal argument and you won't be able to enact this legislation.
Well, I disagree with that. As I said, we consider our measures to be lawful.
Her entire argument was that it's legal because she said so. There was no reasoning behind her claims, and that just added to her humiliation. It wouldn't be unfair to say that she made a fool out of herself on live television. At that point, she was just a liability, and Rishi Sunak did what any sensible person would do: get rid of her and cut his losses. As her final mess up, Suella tried her best to expose Sunak by writing a letter filled with hate.
And Suella Braverman is taking aim at the Prime Minister's character. She's revealing that there was a contract, she alleges, between him and the Prime Minister, which was agreed to bring her on side, which she says was pivotal to him taking over the party after Liz Truss's government collapsed. But she's saying so much else besides. She's trying to close off the Prime Minister's options when the Supreme Court judgment, which is so critical, he thinks, to his fortunes, comes tomorrow on whether the government's allowed to send asylum seekers back to Rwanda. She's saying, well, if you win it, you haven't made proper provision for it to work properly. If you lose it, well, I told you so.
What does this tell you about her emotional maturity? It wouldn't be unreasonable to say that she behaved how Starmer and Angela Rayner are behaving these days. Braverman tried to start a smear campaign against Sunak in hopes of getting him overthrown. However, for that to happen, she needed much more support than the measly few people she managed to rally behind her.
And even if they were to trigger a no-confidence vote, these very unhappy people, and there's quite a few of them around, there aren't enough of them who think they would win that no confidence vote to make it worthwhile the trouble of putting in the letters. So it's not clear where this goes beyond rumbling sounds of battle, and a battle over the whole identity of the Conservative Party, in big part, triggered yesterday by the dismissal of Suella Braverman, the arrival of David Cameron.
Nobody dared to stand up and fight a losing battle. Suella thought she could have Rishi dismissed as the leader of the Conservative Party, but the numbers simply didn't add up. Even after the letter that she wrote to expose him, she failed to rebel. All the while, Sunak found a better replacement for her and appointed David Cameron.
I can help you a little bit. It's pretty grim, actually, a pretty grim either or. She claims he's either too incompetent to deliver on his promises, or perhaps even worse, he never intended to deliver on those promises in the first place. So she questions his competence and his integrity.
Probably not ideal.
But, I mean, how damaging is it for Mr. Sunak? She is saying he is weak, he is ineffective. She is saying that he signed what she seems to suggest is some sort of contract when she agreed to support him.
The Conservatives felt no need to do any damage control at all. It was astonishing how Suella kept whining and nobody seemed to care. She attacked his character, his competence, and his integrity. What's more interesting was the existence of this mysterious contract that he allegedly signed in return for her support. Did it even exist, or was Suella Braverman bluffing again?
You and others who support Mr. Sunak is that, as the former Home Secretary often reminded people, she's pretty confident she speaks for the quiet majority in the country, in the party. This is going to be dangerous for him at this moment, isn't it?
Well, look, can I just tell you that I think I've got a pretty good feel for how colleagues feel here. I'm an elected board member of the Conservative Party, and I know what my own association in Gloucester feels. And I do not think it is correct to say that she speaks for the quiet majority in the Conservative Party. There are good, decent Conservatives all over the country.
Suella Braverman turned her career into one of humiliation, getting destroyed and being incompetent. Even her own party announced on live TV that she's not as important as she thinks. She never spoke for the majority of the Conservatives, and that is why Sunak survived while she was booted out of the party twice. Now, we see Starmer in a similar position. People are furious over his incompetence over the immigration issue and are demanding change. Will Starmer get fired and destroyed like Braverman did? It's your job to hold him accountable, and that's something you can do by liking this video and subscribing to the channel.